Hello, everyone. Welcome to Indigene Digital Summit 2020 and the panel discussion on the evolution of customer-facing teams' capabilities. My name is Sameer Lal, and I head the key accounts portfolio at Indigene. There used to be a time when pharma considered the physician as their primary customers, and all the customer-facing teams are either led by commercial or by medical. And cut to a point in time now where market access as well as payer engagement is so critical to a launch of a product. We thought it would be great to get a panel together showing diverse views of customer-facing teams, whether it's the sales side, medical side, as well as on market access, and then complement with folks from marketing who develop all the content. And then why not have a representative from a PBM just to show how does the other side view all that is being presented to them. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel today. I'm joined by Robin Wintersperry. She was till recently the head of global field-based medical excellence and insights at Sanofi Genzyme. Welcome, Robin. We also have Dana Rodden. She is the head of digital COE and marketing operations at Merck. Hello, Dana.
Good morning.
And rounding off from the pharma side is Chetak Buaria. He's the global head of customer engagement and channel evolution at Merck KGaA. He joins us from Darmstadt in Germany. Welcome, Chetak. We have Jeff Berkowitz. He's the CEO of Real Endpoints. And before that, he was the EVP at United Health Group and also EVP at Walgreens Boots Alliance. Welcome, Jeff.
Morning.
And then finally, Kent Rogers, SVP and Chief Pharma Contracting, Sourcing and Procurement Officer, Industry Relations at OptumRx. Welcome, everybody. So let me kick this off first with you, Chetak, right? And especially things which are very close right now is in terms of the pandemic and the impact it has happened on the customer engagement team, especially on the commercial side. What are some key insights you'd like to share with the audience? And is there, for example, a difference between what the tenured reps have been able to do compared to the new ones, especially in terms of building engagements over remote channels?
Thank you, Sameer, and honored to be here on this esteemed panel and looking forward to the discussion. For us, and I guess that's true for every one of us, last 6 months probably would have learned things which would have not been possible even in a decade. And pharma operations is no exception. We are all enrolled into a huge social experimentation, and no one, of course, asked our consent for that enrollment. We are all just went into this experimentation, and our reps are no exception. Our customers, the physicians are no exceptions. And if we compare from where we are coming, this whole effort towards driving digital and how we can get better in our operations by using technology has been on for the last 5 to 7 years. And every company in trying to leverage technology. But it was facing resistance when it comes to the last mile. And there was resistance from field force perspective, and they had legitimate reasons. Technologies many a times were not mature enough to give them intuitive experience. It required them a lot of effort. And let's face it, there was a fear of losing their relevance and come technology and what will be our role, etc. So that was also somewhere back of their mind. From customers' perspective, also more or less something similar. It was taking them out of their normal workflow to log into a Skype session, etc., going to a website. So it was just something which, why should I bother when I have someone coming and having a face-to-face conversation that's much more personal, and I find it if I find value into it. So there was this block towards that ultimate transformation which everyone was looking at. And then came this COVID, and the fundamental change which happened was first with the internal resistance which was there with the field force. For the first time, instead of being under dilemma that what will happen, it was a fundamental question to them: what will be my relevance if this kind of environment continues? And that's powerful trigger for innovation. When you are challenged for your relevance, there cannot be more powerful motivator to embrace change. So then same thing happened on customer side. Those who were not directly impacted by COVID or not dragged into extra efforts, they, after some point, they were also keen to get part of their normal life back, which was to engage with pharmaceutical companies, learn about new treatment, how they can serve their patients better. And that probably was the major change factor. And then the outcome, if I can quickly summarize, was equally fascinating. Still early days, but some of the trends that we have started noticing are really interesting. So again, when you look at the classical bias that comes with digital, is that this digital is for millennials, this is for digitally native reps, and you typically see younger reps jumping onto it. You see typically younger physician much more into it. And it was very interesting when we started analyzing, for example, data from our remote engagement sessions, and you see a close correlation between reps who were much more tenured in that territory were more successful in also motivating their physicians to try out and experiment this new way. So that gives you a lot of insight. One, it's not about whether you are native or immigrant to the digital. Because of the advent of technology, like this session, we are all connected with 12,000 people around the world, and it just comes intuitive to them beyond that initial bump. So that was fascinating. Also, equally fascinating was from a physician's perspective, and that probably is the last point I would like to make, is that you talk about this personal touch, which was critical motivator for physician to jump onto the technology bandwagon. The important lesson learned is that as we go more towards digital side, how we ensure this personal touch still remains, because that's powerful hook that any organization would have with that customer. And we go about digital content and how you still maintain that personal touch, how you curate your content going forward so that you don't treat everyone equally and don't bombard them with thousands of emails and webinar sessions.
Thank you, Chetak. Actually, a couple of things you made, right? First was, my personal belief is that this pandemic has delivered 3 to 5 years of change management to pharma organizations in 6 months' time. What you would have taken 5 years to accomplish, you are able to do in 6 months. Chetak, you talked about the belief, right, that what is in it for me and so on. I mean, at that point, nobody had a choice. And right, you were able to accomplish far more in terms of transformation than what you had otherwise attempted. And the other piece, Chetak, is also about, everybody talks about a new normal. I don't know if there's a new normal. Perhaps it's the next normal. I don't know if there's going to be a going back to the pre-pandemic world. All of us are so used to this virtual interaction. I don't know if I'll hop on a flight next time anymore, because I can perhaps interact as well digitally than what I could do. And then the final piece, and I'd love to hear from others as well, is about the relationship. We humans want to do it in person, building those relationships. And you mentioned that tenure reps did it better. But I don't know if there's a correlation if the new folks are still able to build new relationships even using digital channels. So a very interesting point, but I wanted to see if anybody else wanted to supplement.
Well, actually, the only thing I would add is that it's supplemental, as you said. I mean, you're not going to replace a hug. You're not going to replace a handshake. You know, that family getting together, the friends, the meeting new colleagues, that one-on-one scientific professional exchange. You can't replace that by being virtual, but it's the next best thing, and it's supplemental. I mean, because we can't always be there one-on-one, but it is a way. Look at all of us here. We're all in different places, but it's certainly a great way for us to get together, see each other, and interact.
I think, Samir, the issue of new relationships is one that we should continue to watch carefully and see what the data actually says, I think, I happen to be, on the board of two companies that are unfortunately launching right at the start of the pandemic, new companies, new products, so not an established portfolio. And it is a little bit harder, I think, to establish net new relationships for a new company, for a new product. And I think we are actually seeing in the data that's coming out that physicians are a bit cautious about, particularly without seeing patients in person and without seeing the reps in person, to actually write a new prescription for a new product without being able to see in person what is happening. So that's one piece I would watch for.
Very interesting, yeah. Dana?
Yeah, I would just agree with what Jeff said. It's going to be very interesting to watch how creating a new relationship remotely develops, because I think certainly we had plenty of evidence and data that showed that supplemental relationship, even that online connectivity works better when you have existing relationships with your customers. But I think that, in a situation where we're going to market, launching a new product, that's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have stories to tell a few decades from now, right? We were there.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
So changing the discussion a bit, and Robin, to you, right? One of the things which has really come out is the shift in balance towards medical, right? And especially physicians saying, okay, if I have a finite amount of time, I'll rather have an MSL-led conversation, more scientific or data-led, and so on and so forth, right? What's some of the insights that you like to share?
Well, thank you, Samir, and thank you for having me on this esteemed panel as well. But I think, as we were just talking about, it's allowing for greater access in many ways. I mean, with opportunities, changes breed new opportunities, and in allowing more access, we can expand to reach more healthcare providers. Healthcare providers also can reach more of the different questions they may have from their MSLs, and also things are shifting to more on demand, as Cheetah was talking about with the personalization of medicine, it's also the individualization for the patients as well. The outreach to patients, the outreach between healthcare providers and the MSLs who are, have the in-depth learning, are the ones that have the resource, are the voice also of the healthcare providers back to the companies, representing the challenges that they have with their patients, the unmet patient needs, as well as, what is going on right now within the local communities, within the practice. No matter where you are in the world, in most regions there are MSLs, and those MSLs are the ones that are really have their pulse on what's going on in healthcare and are providing that back. So, you not only have the digitalization of medicine from the healthcare provider side, the MSLs as that scientific intermediary between the company, but also representing that voice of the patient through the healthcare provider back to the company to allow for change, to allow for us to readjust, rebalance. And there's a lot of flexibility. A lot of times it's on demand now, where the healthcare provider is home, and instead of having to see the MSL or anybody else during normal business hours, it may be after dinner. When the kids are not in school on their computers, or when, they've walked the dog, gotten home from the clinic, have time to go through the files, and then we'll say to, the MSL, hey, listen, would you mind speaking to me later? And also from an MSL standpoint, they can reach more healthcare providers than they could in person. So it's now not just the in-person, which is great, no question about that, but also the ability to sort of expand that universe, if you will, and have a greater outreach. So I think the digitization has really enhanced that, including clinical trials and a lot of other things that we're going to talk about.
Very interesting. And Chetak and Dana, I don't know if you want to supplement from your geographies perspective. Chetak, you're in Europe, and Dana, you're in the US, and also from your functions as well. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Just a couple of points coming to my mind. I think what is also fundamentally happening for industry at large is the kind of product portfolio that most of the companies have today is much more science intense than what it was, say, 10 years to 20 years ago. Primary care, etc., has already gone away, and most of the companies are now focusing on what we call as specialty medications, which are much more personalized, much more targeted, good for patient. But it also raises the bar for the conversation that physician would like to have, which for me, MSL is just a proxy of what we broadly call as peer-to-peer interaction, which means that we also see, along with MSL, higher demand for, webinars with other physicians, and knowledge sharing from KOL to the community and things like that will continue to have higher demand compared to a traditional detailing is already out of scope nowadays.
Well, and just one other quick point there. I mean, the intent of the MSL is always for education. I mean, it's never to sell products, but to be there as a resource, as you're mentioning, especially as things are becoming more complex, but also to represent what is going on in those particular practice dynamics within the different regions, which I think whether you're looking at a huge country like the U.S. or you're looking at different countries between Italy and Tokyo and, Japan, that this particular practice dynamics are mirrored through the MSLs as well.
Yeah, and I think, as we talked about, the portfolios are diversified now, right? So you are talking about, highly scientific medicine. And I think physicians have always wanted to have that medical engagement, that really scientific interaction. And I think to the extent that we can leverage technology to even connect physicians to experts within our organizations, the better.
That's true. So I'm going to shift the conversation a bit, Jeff and Ken, to you guys. Like I said, the focus is right now on market access, payer engagement, and I saw some statistics somewhere. Folks are saying about 34 to 50% of a decision on a product pricing, etc., is now driven through market access. And I don't know if the same amount of resources are being spent on the pharma side. But the question for you, Jeff, is I was reading one of your interviews where you talked about how actually there have been quite a bit of vertical integration outside the pharma space. There are three behemoths who are actually providing service to 80% of the US population. Clearly, what it means is that the way pharma has been selling and marketing may also need to evolve. What are your insights?
Yeah, thanks, Samir. That's actually an interesting statistic in terms of driving physician behavior. Honestly, in the world that we live in today, I would have actually thought it was maybe even higher in terms of the impact on physician decision. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There has been this extraordinary, especially over the past couple of years, vertical and horizontal integration across the drug supply chain. So now you have the three largest insurers all aligned with the three largest pharmacy benefit managers, who are often aligned with a drug distributor, a specialty pharmacy, and a retail pharmacy. And as you mentioned, it's created these three extraordinarily large organizations that are delivering healthcare to an outsized percentage of the U.S. population anyway. And so the implication of that is that, and especially right now, as we even think of the pandemic and gaining new formulary status, is that you've got three players that are all working together. But the pharma industry is still over here doing some of the same thing, even though we're talking about innovation like digital and leveraging some of the lessons learned in the pandemic. We still have pharma companies developing products and hoping for the best from a pricing and reimbursement perspective across these three large players. Yet you have these integrated entities all working together for good or for bad, aligning and figuring out how to create value within the system, all often at the expense of the pharmaceutical company. I think it will continue to have an outsized impact on physicians' ability to prescribe more freely, just because they're so powerful. Even today, physicians learn very quickly the path of least resistance and what goes through and where they have the least office pushback and patient pushback. And certainly that integrated consolidating system is driving a lot of that.
And Ken, love to hear your perspective as well on some of this consolidation and what does it mean for the end consumer and obviously for the industry at large.
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff in the sense that the model from pharma hasn't really evolved all that much over the last several decades. And as the payer space has grown and diversified to stretch across the supply chain that isn't just related to formulary, but it's also related to how drug gets from manufacturer ultimately to patient. Oftentimes the life sciences is really the way the payer community refers to pharma, sees the reimbursement as a bit of a commercialization strategy at the end of the process versus actually advancing it further into the pipeline area. So when you're looking at assets of phase 2 products across the board, that's really the most appropriate time to engage a payer community and be able to actually determine whether or not there's commercial viability, even though there's scientific relevance. If you've got a cold chain product that's got 90 below requirements in order for you to get from one to the other, in fact, actually look at the vaccines. That's going to be one of the issues. We've got some of the vaccines that we've got cold chain distribution issues versus others, and you hear that being played out in the press talking about the viability of each of these agents. I don't know that we see that in that phase 2 and phase 3 phase for pharmaceutical companies and trying to determine, well, how would the supply chain actually respond to this, react to this, and how do we prepare for it? It could actually be as impactful as making a go, no-go decision on some of these assets. So I would say both within the C-suite, within pharma boards, as well as just in general within the industry, reimbursement should be more front and center in terms of a strategy versus just the sales and marketing components.
And very interesting piece, Kent, you talked about how the companies, licenses companies have to engage with payers almost at phase 2, even perhaps earlier, right? Which is quite different the way they would engage with physicians. They right, pretty much it comes just before approval and so on. So again, Diana, Chetak, Robin, what was your counter view on the life sciences perspective with Kent and Jeff provided?
Yeah, I mean, I think completely agree. I think getting that input in phase 2 is critically important as you're looking at your commercialization strategy. And I think, interestingly enough, even if we do that well, which we should, by the time sometimes the product gets to market, something else has, intervened that makes it less commercially viable. So, but certainly that input early in that phase 2 development, I would agree, completely critical, because it's not just about bringing a drug to market that works. It has to be truly differentiated.
Yeah, and I would just add one more quick thing too, is that price is front and center, as you guys know. Final rule just came out in terms of importation this morning from the Trump administration, and I cannot tell you the amount. I'd say probably the overwhelming majority of pharma companies, large and small, are making their pricing decisions very close to the period of launch. Now, while they may get input from the payer community, oftentimes, they're still under the assumption that high price, high rebates is the game, and certainly that is today. But there are opportunities, and we've seen this happen in several different drug categories where, coming out with an aggressive pricing strategy could actually undercut the market's competition if you do it the right way. But this pricing strategy decision is usually at the very end with, maybe some input from the payers, but this is a key component to the viability, a commercial viability of a product as well. So that should be a consideration when you're in that phase 2, phase 3 phase. Where are the current products, if there are in the market? What's the price history been? What should our pricing strategy be? Is there an opportunity for the supply chain to actually work with that pricing strategy? All of these should be commercial components that they think about earlier in the process.
Yeah, and it's actually remarkable that, when we have this conversation in 2020, and certainly many of us have been living with this for decades, it really hasn't changed that much. The system itself has essentially doubled down on itself, and there's no incentive for disruption. So I remember having conversations with the CEO of a large pharma that I worked for in 1998, 2000, and said, why do we have PBMs? They're not adding value, they're middlemen. Fast forward 2 decades, we're having the exact same conversation, and they're more powerful, more influential. And Samir, we started this conversation about innovation and leapfrogging. You said, we took 3 to 5 years of change management in 6 months. we've had 2 decades of these same exact issues around pricing and reimbursement, and there have been very few lessons learned. It's still this very traditional approach of qual and quant research with 6 to 8 payers across a number of segments to come to a price point. And I think Ken said something really important, and then I'll stop talking, which is, engagement at the CEO and board level. When you think about the amount of investment that goes into the research and development and clinical trial piece of the puzzle here and developing products in tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, and then all of a sudden you're 12 months, 15 months before launch, and you're sort of negotiating with a vendor to cut them down, $10,000, $20,000 on $100,000 pricing project, after you've spent, $100 million on bringing your product to market. So it's quite remarkable in the context of this conversation that there's been very little innovation through all the things that Kent was just talking about, yet we continue to figure out ways to innovate digitally and the way we communicate with representatives and doctors and patients, but not with payers.
But and one other thing I would add to what you were all saying is that voice of the patient too, because I think that is coming in louder and louder. Which in the years past, the traditional pharma basically did the development, looked at the supply chain, did all those other things that we're just talking about. But the voice of the patient advocacy groups, especially as we're moving into more and more specialty medicines, is playing a bigger role, and earlier, as well as real-world medicine and real-world evidence, I should say.
And I would take it one step further, just say one more thing. It's not only the voice of the patient, but market access has now become a spectrum of not just reimbursement and coverage through United Health Group or Optum with Kent, but whether that does not translate anymore into patient access. And there's now this disconnect in market access strategies around, I've gained coverage and reimbursement with the 3 large PBMs, but that doesn't solve the problem of whether the patient can ever afford it. And so pharma companies are getting a double whammy of what Kent was saying about rebates and gross to net hits, but also then trying to facilitate patient access with copay cards and making patients be able to afford a product. So they're getting hit on both ends without a strategy meeting in the middle.
Sure. And Chetak, from your vantage point, you're obviously in the EU, but market access is still as important in that part of the world as well, right? And I'm guessing you resonate with a lot of things you said.
Absolutely. There are markets, for example, Nordics, completely innovation driven. We are already there at a situation where you don't need the sales and marketing. It's basically you get the data, prove the evidence, and you get the reimbursement. Is as direct as that it can get. The rest of the world is not yet there, but eventually that's what we need. We need scientific evidence with a very clear demonstration of value to the patient, and then that's what we should be striving for.
You've almost committed heresy there, Chetak. You said we don't need sales and marketing, and so hopefully not too soon.
We will rediscover ourselves for sure.
That's fair, right? There's an opportunity. So let's dig a bit deeper, Kent. Right? You did talk about new launches, and this world currently is all about biotechs, right? And most of these companies are being led by the CEO, who is also the innovator, right? So how do you actually provide them the guidance of what should they be looking for, right, for when they're looking to add their products right into the formularies, and also in terms of contracting? What advice would you have for those folks?
Yeah, so there's, I'll try not to be too long-winded, because that's a really big question that I talk to pharma companies about on a daily basis. For large companies, the top tier companies, that interaction really at the C-suite level is pretty limited. Those are large lumbering organizations for the most part that will actually lead the R&D and the market access decisions pretty broadly across a bunch of groups of individuals. And then you get into the mid-tier and the smaller size companies. To your point, a lot of times you'll get an innovator that becomes the CEO and is trying to call together a commercial team as they're getting towards their commercial launch. What I always encourage any company of any size to do is engage the payer, as we were talking about before, as early as you can in the process. I'd say the best model that we have within a company today is one that actually brings us a pipeline of products that is anywhere between phase 2 all the way to phase 3, and then does routine commercial updates for us each quarter. This is engaging a payer at a level to try to determine, if there is a partnership there, or at least act as though there is. Oftentimes, I think the payer community is certainly seen as trying to stifle innovation and to block innovation. It's really meant to challenge it. When you sit on the other side of the desk and you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new medications coming out every year, literally hundreds of thousands of NDCs, you see the full breadth of activity within the pharma space. And there are more products that would be considered therapeutically equivalent or me too than there are really truly innovative molecules. And so unfortunately, when you've got a C-suite or a founder, CEO certainly, that's really in love with that molecule, it's very hard for them to be objective about the fact that there's a therapeutic equivalence view that the P&T committee has. Now, as was mentioned before by Robin, patient advocacy is a big deal. And if you can get patient advocacy engaged, that also works within the payers. We get letters from individual patients. Our CEOs get called from patient advocacy groups. All of that plays in. Again, it's not meant to stifle innovation. We want the right drug for the right patient at the right time. But there's also a very biased view of these molecules if they have a real therapeutic equivalence and just maybe a different mechanism of delivery. So in addition to doing all your research about, well, how should I price it and what will payers do and what will my tier status be? And, there's a fairly standard approach to that. Go see the payers, ask them their opinions. Most of the time, the market research that's being done is likely at a regional level. You're going to get somebody that's retired that was in the payer community, and they're going to be participating in these studies and giving you a fairly narrow window of responses. You need a more involved conversation. So I don't know that there's fear to going to a payer because they don't want to hear what they don't want to hear. But to Jeff's point, when there's that much money on the line, and frankly, that sometimes the future of your company and the commercialization of the product is on the line, engage them deep and broad as early as you can, and then throughout the process. I think that's where the companies have really found the most success.
Thank you. Very, very insightful, Kent. I was noting the point about how the innovator-led companies, are so much in love with their product, the communication about therapeutic equivalence, they are almost equal products already out there. I'm sure it's a very difficult thing to digest. Go on.
Yeah, and just one other quick add too is that the logistics of things that may not, and this would be again the involvement with payers early on and the understanding within a board, much less, in the C-suite. There's a cadence to the Medicare and the commercialization strategies that differ. We do an annual cadence with Medicare, and when a drug launches that might actually cause a negative change, let's say we need to remove a product in order to add that product. If it launches, let's say right now in the middle of the fall of 2020, we're not going to be looking for it to be an addition until 2022 because the 2021 benefit year was already decided upon at the beginning of this year. And that's oftentimes news to the CEOs of these companies saying, well, wait a minute, why can't I get on the Medicare formulary? That's a locked benefit design that doesn't allow any negative changes. So the launch timing is even important when it comes to Medicare. In the commercial space, every payer is a little bit different, but you're going to make negative changes maybe once or a couple of times a year. So if you launch outside of that window, it could be, for instance, for us, if a product were to launch today and it required a negative change, we're just now at the window that we can make a decision for July of next year. Well, that's a heck of a burn rate if you're launching in October and you've got at least 7 or 8 months or 9 months of burn rate not getting on formularies. These are really key components that are not often appreciated when a new company comes to market with a product.
And Jeff, I'd love to have you chime in because I know you consult a lot with these smaller biotechs, and at least my eyebrows got raised when Ken talked about the time frame for Medicaid negative change and so on.
Yeah, look,
Go ahead, Jeff.
There's so much valuable insight that Kent is sharing, right? It's easy to talk about these issues broadly and talk about pricing and reimbursement and relationships with payers, but there is, just like drug distribution or clinical trial design and execution, there are a lot of really specific tactical hurdles here that also need to be handled. And it also goes to, I think, sort of capabilities and relationships. The world has really changed. Some of these customers that, certainly that Kent is representing at United Health Group and Optum are so complex, so large, so strategic that it's not about the way it used to be, where you had an account manager that maybe had a relationship, that could call somebody up and try to work out a deal for contracting. You really have to think about what are the capabilities that you need to interact within this consolidated, integrated healthcare system. And I think one of the challenges for the small biotechs is certainly I absolutely agree. And we see this over and over and over again. And I boil it down to the silly adage, nobody likes to hear that their baby is called ugly. And you see all of these scientific founders that bring these products to market over years and just absolutely don't believe the feedback that no, there is competition here, or there may be a challenge, and they don't want to hear it. But what happens is they then go out and build an organization for that one product, for that new company, and they'll often tap into a large company. I think it's when you hear Kent talk about the ecosystem, and he's talking about large lumbering organizations, that's not a kind characterization of large pharma coming from their largest customer, right? And that's a perception that is out there and a challenge. But what happens is you get a biotech company that is bringing in somebody from Novartis or Glaxo or a large company that now wants to run market access for a small specialty complicated biotech. They may understand a PBM negotiation, or worse yet, they may bring in somebody from one of those large companies that only understands health outcomes and publishing health outcomes data or something like that. And then, as I said before, there is this now spectrum of market access, from pricing and reimbursement to the value proposition to patient access, that no one person with a market access background may have. So it becomes a very complicated function to actually build and create, so that they can go out and have a productive conversation with an organization like Kent's. Well, one last comment that we haven't even touched on in this space is that there are all sorts of other stakeholders now that are also weighing, not only the patient groups. So there are now health technology assessment entities. Obviously, the one most influential one right now being ICER, that is also weighing in heavily. That often companies are completely flat-footed, thinking that ICER will never pay attention to them, and then all of a sudden see a press release or get a call 2 weeks before they have to give all their data over to ICER to make this very critical determination around the value of their product, and they weren't prepared for it at all.
Thank you, Jeff. And just a quick thing for the audience, we will have a Q&A in about 10 minutes, so feel free to send in your questions in the chat window, and we'll try to address as many as we can. I'm going to make a segue, Dana, to you, all right? And I'm looking at you as a representative from the marketing organization building all of this content, and you're hearing from everybody, all right? And let's take a perspective from, and I know our association goes a few years now, almost 6, 7. And I remember at that time you talked about an all-digital launch, right? And at that time, it sounded heresy, but were you present? Were you ahead of the time?
Has it been that long? Let's start there. But, I think that, we all wish we had a crystal ball, but, what drove that at the time was actually necessity. The healthcare environment was and is consolidating and integrating at accelerating rates of speed. Ubiquitous technology was part of everyday life. And we were and are still being asked to do more with less, right? So, that was, it was in the cards then that we really had to transform our customer engagement model. And I think for our customers, that translates into expectations to see, more patients in a day, and our customer facing roles are expected to see more customers, right? So there's this completely inverse relationship or conflicting expectations in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And at that time, we hadn't really planned a digital only, or probably more a digitally led launch. We planned and added in digital tactics, planning digitally led and inserting interesting digital tactics is, they're very different approaches, right? So, doing it well and meeting customer needs is, more important and relevant than it was, 7 to 10 years ago. And, I remember a story it was in 2010, I was based in London at GSK, and we were very actively looking at this question. And, one of my colleagues said, well, okay, so, what are we digitizing, and that was in 2010. And I paused and I said, I guess everything, and therein sort of lies the, the important question about, how do we prioritize our customers' needs, right? And what do organizations need to do to operate in lockstep with, the customer needs as an imperative?
Of course. And Chetak, Robin, if you wanted to supplement on this piece again, right? Because Dana talked about what do we need to digitize, and you have to think differently, right? It's not a traditional PowerPoint. Now I have to convert it into an electronic format or a PDF, but you have to think from a digital lens, and sometimes it's a little challenging as well, right? Isn't it?
Well, I think there's a lot of upscaling too and upskilling, So we're looking at things like social listening now, which we never did before. I mean, we've got MSLs going to meetings and looking at real-time conversations about the different presentations and then tweeting to some of the healthcare providers and having conversations right there and then. Or do you want to meet up right after to talk about that hot scientific topic? But so we talk about the MSLs who basically are used to working virtually, and most of them have backgrounds as MD, PhDs, and PharmDs, that deep science. But also there are times that, as we're talking about access to the patient, to the providers, we're also sometimes forgetting about access to the tools, or the ability of those providers, the healthcare providers, to even know how to utilize those tools, or even be able to utilize Zoom, for example, within the institutions. I mean, so you can have MSLs with the knowledge and in-depth, critical understanding and so forth, but they also have to be able to have those conversations and really, share that best strategy and that medical information. And a lot of that is also changing in terms of the insights that they're bringing in, how we analyze the insights, how we're looking at even advanced analytics and what that really means. We want to get to more predictive medicine, which patients are going to respond better, which ones are going to not respond, and taking this wealth of information that we're talking about, but really be able to use it as effectively as possible, communicate it, have access on that scientific exchange level, but also how do we really utilize the power, whether it's real world evidence, clinical trials, access to payers, all of the rest of this information, how do we really utilize that and the insights coming in from the field, to really maximize that benefit for patients and enhance that patient journey.
No, just very quickly to supplement what Robin said was very important. It's not only a question of what you want to digitalize, but also how you go about doing it, because the important piece there is the insight that you get out of it. The way I see it, your rep was the best personalization engine, because the person knows the needs and then tailors the messaging and engagement to a very personalized way. Now here comes all digital, and how you make sure that at least from customers' perspective, you still deliver the same experience around personalization. How you understand my need, how you take me on that customer journey that we all aspire for.
And we've had, you go to the other end of the spectrum, and we've had healthcare providers that say, can you fax that information to me? And especially some of the millennials are turning around going, oh, what? Can I scan it? Don't you have an iPhone? So, the world is certainly changing, and we're trying to individualize, but also individualize it to what the audience needs and how they want to communicate.
Of course. And I'm looking at the clock. I want to make sure we are at least able to take some questions from the audience. And I want to apologize in advance to anybody's question we are not able to take up. But first, Kent, you are the star of our show today, right? So first one to you is how open are PBMs payers to collaboratively partner and share patient population data to model pricing for differentiated products?
I would say very open, but there's a way to go about that. So I think a lot of times if there's going to be a contract that's in play, then typically pharmaceutical manufacturer will ask for utilization so that they can determine how to create a return on investment for their deal. But with our particular organization, I know there's a lot of others that are out there. One of the most powerful assets that we have, and again, we do have competitors in this space, is the amount of longitudinal data we have regardless of the carrier that's involved. We have a little over 95 million lives within a database that was formerly in Genix, that's within our Optum Insight and Life Sciences business unit. And what's important about this is it's longitudinal in nature to about 3 or 4 years, about 40% of the lives. It's agnostic to the site of care, it's agnostic to the payer. So if you've got a molecule that's, let's say, new to market and in the rare and orphan disease space, and you need to find those patients, that's often what I hear a lot of times is that they've got a great medication that they had, clinical trial settings with maybe 50 or 30 patients in the trial design, and they can't find the patients once they get to market. Well, there's a patient journey that's out there. And in fact, I think very similar to the way Google and all of the other big companies are marketing today, they know what I had for breakfast yesterday. They know where I'm going to dinner tonight. They know what I'm buying on the internet. They know my activity before I know my activity. Well, that's the same kind of technology that we're applying to the medical space and the pharmacy space. Just watching the patterns of how they engage within the healthcare system can find patients that are otherwise very hard to find. That's valuable data. And while I know there's a lot of great market research firms out there, come to the source. We've got an enormous amount of information that can be culled in order for them to find that journey. And then even if a drug is on market, I think there's a huge shift, as Jeff had referred to, as we've started to grow, and we're very much a horizontal company. We've got a little over 100,000 providers that work for our corporation. So we're very much at the touch point of the patients. That is a very applicable design for us to start to take disease management programs, but actually more technology. With these providers, we can actually institute either disease management programs or, let's say, NCCN guidelines, trying to get them to follow those guidelines in a large format. There's huge cost savings to just trying to create more uniformity across the treatment protocol. Well, that's also important for new medications that are trying to be within that treatment protocol. So it seems like maybe a rambling answer to a really good question, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of very valuable data within the payer space that should be accessed, but accessed even earlier in the process, as I mentioned before.
That was very insightful. Jeff, did you want to supplement anything to what Ken said?
No, I think, again, the macro theme there is don't be afraid to communicate. I think it comes out over and over again in Ken's comments, which is it's the one place where, again, there's been all this consolidation and integration in the drug supply chain working together, and pharma still sits over here on the opposite end of the spectrum. I think what you're hearing over and over again as a best practice is don't wait till the last minute to make those decisions and then go out with a payer engagement strategy. Figure out how you're going to fit into this ecosystem early on. And that's not just the pricing decision or how you're going to contract, but what is the need for your product? What does the competitive set look like? And how do you have those discussions early on? I remember when I was at Optum and United, and we speak about this all the time with biotech customers. Unfortunately, the implication of all of these issues and all of the pricing pressure is that pharma and biotech have gone after ever smaller populations for ever smaller rare and orphan diseases because there's a perception that those will be immune from price pressure. But I can tell you that when I was in the halls of United and Optum, we weren't talking about a specific rare and orphan disease for a population that might be 10 or 50 people out of 100 million people we were caring for. We were talking about diabetes and antibiotics and COPD and asthma and some of the bigger cardiovascular disease. And those are the types of, I think, opportunities for competitive products to think more differently. And I think that the last thing I would say is that, I do think where there will be innovation and where we are at the very earliest stages on this side is in the ability to have pharma companies work within that ecosystem and really put their money where their mouth is and support an outcome-based view of contracting and understand that they would be working collaboratively with an organization like Kent to make sure that both the product and the ecosystem and the physicians that Ken is talking about actually lead to a better health outcome, both for the patient and the system, and pharma is going to have to participate in that way from a contracting perspective. I think we're at the early stages of that, but it will continue to evolve in that direction.
Yeah, very insightful. I have the next question, and then I'll have you respond first, and then Chetak and Robin, if you guys can supplement as well, right? So the question is, when you're setting up virtual engagement strategies, right, what can be done to add extra value? How can we hold attention span in a world of Zoom fatigue? Hopefully there's not much fatigue in this session. But any new formats that you're seeing which are more impactful than the others? Any insights first from the marketing perspective and then from sales and MSL?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't mean to give an overly basic answer, but I do think it comes down to the way you hold attention in a virtual engagement is by having really interesting, engaging content that's going to meet the need of that customer. And I think it's more, if we focus on that and less on sort of, the tech or the different platforms and really think about those virtual engagement strategies and how we're delivering content to a customer's need. I think that is just at the heart of what keeps anyone's attention, right? Because even in virtual engagements and Zoom fatigue, I think that, it still holds true that if you're engaged and interested in what the dialogue is, you could leave a Zoom meeting just as engaged as, you did another meeting, although admittedly, online engagement nonstop all day can be very draining.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Chetak or Robin?
I will step back and say that virtual hasn't changed anything. This is fundamental. Even when you are meeting someone face to face, if you're not adding value, the other person will walk away after a couple of minutes, or maybe if he or she is polite, maybe meet once, but next time will certainly not let you in. So the fundamental point of marketing to have that engaging content, which is meeting customers' need, that's the universal truth, whether it is virtual or physical.
Well, and also from an MSL standpoint, we do a lot of training of the MSLs. How do you have an appropriate virtual engagement? Make sure things are set up appropriately. Make sure both parties can hear each other. Some of the very, as Dana said, some of the very basic things. And also, there are so many more opportunities now to engage at different points in time that we didn't have before, so it opens up a lot of opportunities, as well as, the types of things, the social listening, the different groups, like from LinkedIn to, to Facebook that we didn't pay that much attention to. But certainly, these virtual advisory boards, with blogs afterwards where you can continue that engagement. You can involve people across time zones. I mean, there's so many things you can do now that we weren't able to do before. But, again, back to what, Dana was saying, it's got to be engaging. It's got to be something that's important to them. But also we can continue those conversations now through many different channels in many different ways.
Couldn't agree more.
As much as just a quick point.
Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say, I think, and even these last 6 months, I mean, it's fundamentally changed how everyone is engaging online, right? So it's more of an opportunity than ever, because I think we just so quickly came up the curve in terms of being, really comfortable engaging online in an everyday life virtually.
Well, and more personal sometimes. I mean, the dog runs into the room, the kids scream, things happen, but it's also added more personal touch to a lot of relationships in a very different way than it used to be.
Yeah, we become far more accepting of the dog walking into the room or the child coming into the lap, right? Earlier it would be
yes, it's possible. Expected now.
No, it's exactly all of us in the situation. So a question for you, Jeff, given the situation of new launches, however, lack of customer access, what are those critical insights about the customer that Real Points is going to be looking for, and what kind of support from marketing will enable this engagement? Right? Are there insights on customers that you could provide?
Yeah, I think there, given the discussion has spanned sort of marketing and physicians and market access, there are two elements of that. It's all of the things on the market access side we've been talking about. In fact, what we're hearing on that side is that it's been particularly challenging because, as Ken said, they're busy doing a lot of different things. The tactical timing of some of those discussions is really important. And it's been hard to get the attention for new companies to do that contracting. And it's been what I'm hearing is it's been a little bit slower to actually execute even against some of those agreements because the organizations internally are focused on lots of other issues like how they're filling prescriptions, 30 days or 90 days and things like that. So I think on the market access side, it's continuing to have, all of that dialogue that Kent has mentioned throughout this. And then going back to the beginning of the conversation, I think for those new product launches, it's really looking forward and not getting bogged down in the past. Where I've seen it work best, even on, one of the companies that I'm on the board of is no excuses from the management team to say, well, this is what it would have looked like pre-COVID, and this is what our plan was. But now we have all these, hurdles. Texas and California aren't allowing us any access, and it's 20% of our product. I think where I've seen it be effective is those organizations that have pivoted not only in this discussion around advancing all of their capabilities to communicate and share a different value proposition, but also just realizing, I think you said, Samir, right at the beginning, not the new normal, but the next normal, and really engaging their teams and leading through it in a way to say, this is our next normal. So what is our plan now? Let's not juxtapose it with what we thought might happen. This is where we are. This is our next normal. Come to me with solutions and ways to communicate that allow me to operate and continue to grow and impact patients in this next normal. And that's where I think, some of the launches are being more successful than those that are just saying, well, maybe we should put a hold on this. Maybe we should wait another 6 months and relaunch. And it's those companies that are really pivoting to innovation and accepting it and also allowing it to come back to them organically. I'd say that's the one other thing is that, innovation, and I've learned this particularly at my time at Walgreens, any, large company or as Ken said, a lumbering large organization that has a door with a label over it that says innovation, there's no innovation happening there. Right. So where the innovation had always happened was in the field. And so the other, best practice that we're seeing is this constant communication with the home office, with the marketing teams, from the reps, from the physicians, from the patients around what's happening now and how to leverage that information and come up with ways to manage the situation moving forward.
Thank you, Jeff. We have about a few minutes left, but what I want to do was close off from where we started off, right? This panel is all about building effective engagement with our customers. And I believe the cornerstone of any engagement is about trust, right? And once the trust is established, then engagement, relationship, all of those happen, right? And how does that happen considering we live in a world of online dating, or we try new clothes and we walk away, right? And like you talked about, we can meet virtually, but it's so much easier to just switch off and just walk away, right? Whereas when you're in person, you don't do that as much. So if we can go around the table, just 1 point from each one of you, right, around trust and building effective engagement in this new or the next normal.
Maybe I guess I could. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of building trust, I think that's consistently, being consistent in how you're bringing value to your customer, right? So I think that is something that, builds trust over time, right? So I do think that consistency of value and, truly listening to what your customers are saying and the feedback and the insights and responding to that. I think that's core to trust.
And to add to that is to be that resource, a place where they can turn for evidence-based data, for information, especially at times where they have questions about patients or they have questions about the clinical trials, to really be that trusted resource that is responsive, that meets their needs and is there when they need them.
Absolutely. For us, it's very clear that whether it is digital, physical, these are all means to that ultimate end that you want to aspire to realize, which is that trust and credibility as partner in healthcare. And for us, that's the ultimate kind of sacred truth that we want to protect.
Yeah, so Samir, when I hear that word, it's funny because even back my first experience in pharma, 13 years at Schering-Plough, when Fred Hassan came in as CEO, he changed the entire mission statement and trajectory of the company with 3 or 4 simple words, and changed the mission statement of the company to earn trust every day. 4 simple words that I still remember to this day, almost 20 years later, because it was just a focus throughout the entire organization, from research and development to patients to payers, which was to earn trust every day. And I think those words still mean a tremendous amount, even more in today's environment than ever.
Very, very powerful.
Yeah, I would just echo that, having worked in the same organization as Jeff on his team while that was actually going on, is that I think regardless of the asset or regardless of the medium that we're going to be in, trust is an overtime process, and it can be removed at one act. I don't think how we're acting on Zoom or the electronic mediums, or even just kind of the way things are today, really changes that. I think it's always been the case.
Awesome. So we are at time. I want to thank each one of you. It's been great, and it's been very insightful. I know I speak for the audience. Each one of them, I'm sure, are able to take away items that they can then implement in their organizations. So before we wrap up, I just want to remind the audience, one, there's a keynote session right after this. Please make sure to attend. Also, make the most of the experience zone and also the opportunity to network at the virtual environment. So once again, thank you so much, each members of the panel and the audience, for listening in. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.